Hi there, my name is David and I'm part of the team here at MyWorks Software. Today I'll be showing you how to set up your WooCommerce sync for QuickBooks Desktop. This will include activating our helper plugin, connecting our sync to QuickBooks using the QuickBooks Web Connector, reviewing your mappings, and setting your default settings. This will be all you need to know to get through setup and begin syncing your orders, inventory, and more. As a reminder, everything I'm reviewing here today is already available in our documentation site. You can also review these documentation articles for the same step-by-step instructions you'll see here today to get your sync all set up, as well as best practices and additional documentation on other features of our sync. Additionally, we include a complimentary setup call and screen share with all of our plans, so you can schedule that within your account with us if you'd like extra help with setup or just have questions. We'll get started by reviewing our Before You Install doc. This breaks down the very basic requirements you'll need to have before getting set up. As you can see here, there's a few different requirements. The first is simply an active QuickBooks Desktop company. We support any version of QuickBooks Desktop that's 2015 or later. So whether you have Pro, Premier, or Enterprise, or any of the additions like manufacturing or wholesale, we support them all. We also support different providers like third-party hosting companies like Right Networks or Summit. As long as your QuickBooks company has an internet connection and you have admin access, those are the only requirements. And as a note there, we do require admin access just to initially connect to QuickBooks. When you're running our sync on a day-to-day basis, we won't require admin access. The second requirement is simply an active WooCommerce store. As long as you have a valid SSL certificate on it, there won't be any other requirements needed there. QuickBooks does require a valid SSL certificate in order to connect with your site, so that is important to note. And the last requirement we have is that you have the QuickBooks Web Connector installed on your computer. We'll show you how to find this here in a moment, and 99% of the time this is already installed on your computer because it's bundled with QuickBooks and installed on your computer when you first install QuickBooks. As we note here, you can verify this by visiting File and Update Web Services in QuickBooks, or just by searching Web Connector in your Start menu. If in the rare case you do not have the Web Connector on your computer, it's very easy to install from Intuit's website here. And that's something we can assist you with over a setup call or over a support ticket as well. Now we'll get started with the first part of setup, installing our helper plugin. At this point, you'll need to make sure you've already signed up for an account with us, whether it's a free trial or a paid plan. Here in your client area, you'll be able to view this dashboard after you log in. We'll go up to the Plans menu here on the top, and we'll choose your QuickBooks Desktop Sync plan. You'll see a few different areas on this page. You'll see your license key is here. We'll use that in a moment. And you'll be able to download the plugin by clicking the Download button here. So we'll click Download to download that zip file, and then we'll install it in your WooCommerce store in just a moment. You'll note here at the bottom of the page, we include a few support options. The first is to schedule a setup call. We do include a complimentary setup call with all of our plans. So if you'd like additional help screen sharing, this is a great option for you. Additionally, here's a link to view our documentation. This is the site I was just on a moment ago, and this has a complete documentation site that walks you through anything you may need to know about our sync. You can also open up a ticket with us. We have a 24/7 support team that's happy to help with any technical support questions. You can join our Slack community, or if you have a sales or billing question, you can live chat with our team. Getting back to our sync, now that you've downloaded our plugin, you'll be able to jump into your WooCommerce admin, and the next step is to install our plugin there. We'll jump into your WooCommerce store, and we'll go to the Plugins menu here on the left. We'll click the Add New button here in the top, then Upload, and we'll choose the file you just downloaded. Once you've chosen that, you can click Install Now and follow the steps to activate it. Once it's been activated, you'll see it show up here in the list of plugins as WooCommerce Sync for QuickBooks Desktop by MyWorks. Any future updates we issue to the plugin will automatically show up here with a message to update like every other WooCommerce plugin. Now that our sync is activated, you'll see a new tab here in the top left of your WooCommerce admin called MyWorks Sync. The first thing we're going to do is visit the Connection menu to enter our license key in. You can copy this license key from your account with us and then simply enter it here. Now that it's activated, you'll see there's a few additional tabs over here, and we can proceed with setup. A few important things to note is that this license key will always stay the same, and it will always be saved here in your sync unless you deactivate our plugin. All of the settings and mappings that we set here will always be saved in your site unless our plugin is deleted. Now the first step of setup is going to be to visit this connection menu, and we'll click the Save and Generate QWC file here on the left. This will download a .qwc file, which you'll need to open on your QuickBooks computer to complete the next step of setup. We normally recommend doing this setup all on your QuickBooks computer so that you can download this file simply directly to your QuickBooks computer. However, if you're doing your setup in WooCommerce on a different computer, you can simply email or transfer this file to your QuickBooks computer to open it there. A couple important notes here is that normally our users will set up their sync for the first time on their live site and connect it to their live QuickBooks. This is easy to do due to the automatic nature of our sync that only covers new data. So you can easily control how any new data syncs into your QuickBooks. If you'd like to connect a staging site to your QuickBooks, you can easily do that, and we have documentation articles that walk you through how to move that connection to your live site whenever you're ready. So now that we've downloaded this .qwc file, we're going to move into QuickBooks and open up the Web Connector. In QuickBooks, we'll go to File, and then Update Web Services. If you don't see this menu in your QuickBooks, you can simply search Web Connector in your Start menu. Now that we've selected this, you'll see that the QuickBooks Web Connector is opened. This is the tool that you'll use, and this simply acts as a bridge that allows our sync on your site to talk back and forth with QuickBooks. As long as this application remains open, you'll be able to sync with QuickBooks. Now we're going to click Add an Application down here in the bottom right. You'll be able to choose that QWC file you downloaded a moment ago and click Open. The first screen you're going to receive is a screen to authorize connecting to your site. You'll see your SSL certificate details here, and you'll see your website here as well. Once you're ready, go ahead and click OK. Now that you've clicked OK, you're going to get a second authorization. This is asking you to choose when to allow the Web Connector to access your QuickBooks company. You'll always want to choose the fourth button here on the left that says Yes, always allow access even if QuickBooks isn't running. This will ensure that even if QuickBooks is closed, the Web Connector is still able to sync between your site and QuickBooks. For some users, you may see an additional drop-down below this radio button. This will ask you to choose a list of your current QuickBooks users to connect as. You'll always want to make sure you choose the admin user. This ensures that our sync has all of the permissions it needs when it talks back and forth with QuickBooks. Whenever you're ready, you can click Continue. You do not need to check this box to allow the application to access personal data. After you click Continue, there'll be one more authorization screen to confirm what you've selected, and you can click Done. After you've clicked Done, you'll give the Web Connector a few seconds. Sometimes it likes to close here, so we'll just go back to File and Update Web Services. Now if we scroll down, we can see that we've added a new application here. You'll see over on the right that the password field is blank. So we're going to switch back to our site, and we'll notice here on this connection page that there's a password here in the middle. We're going to click Show on the right and copy that password in. Both of these will be automatically generated for you for security, and this is simply what QuickBooks will use to authorize and connect to our sync on your website. So we'll switch back to the Web Connector, and we'll go ahead and paste our password in there. After you hit Paste, you can hit Tab or Enter on your keyboard, and it will ask you to save the password. We'll go ahead and click Yes. Now that this is saved, you're ready to move on to the next step of refreshing your data. This allows our sync to run an initial scan on QuickBooks, to pull in any relevant QuickBooks information like a list of products, accounts, etc., into our sync. And you'll use this information in the next step of our setup for mappings and settings. The first thing we're going to do is just run, before we refresh data, is going to run a quick connection test to QuickBooks between QuickBooks and WooCommerce to check your connection. We're going to click the checkbox here on the left and click the Update Selected button here on the top. We'll watch this green text here, and what we're looking for is this green text called No Data Exchange Required. This is just saying that our sync is up to date and there's nothing that's needed to sync. A few important notes here is before you do this, go ahead and just check the queue here on the left under MyWorks Sync and make sure it's empty. This way it won't sync anything into QuickBooks until we're ready for it. If you receive any error other than No Data Exchange Required, like authentication failed or an XML error, be sure to check out our documentation to see if there's any helpful tips that may help you work through these. Usually first-time errors here are due to a security plugin on your site that conflicts with the QuickBooks connection. If you're on WP Engine and need to turn off their internal setting called redirect bots, which we have a doc explaining, or a similar type of connection or network issue. If our docs don't seem to help you find that answer, our support team is always available over ticket to assist further. Now that we've tested out your QuickBooks connection, we'll go ahead and start on the first step of refreshing data. We'll switch over to the Refresh Data menu here on the left under MyWorks Sync, and we'll turn all these switches on. This is telling us that the next time the Web Connector runs, to refresh data for these type of data in QuickBooks. As our text here on the top of the page explains, refreshing data is when our sync scans QuickBooks for the latest list of data. This only usually needs to be done during setup, and these switches do not need to be on during active syncing. So once we're finished refreshing data, we'll come down here and hit Save again. Now that we've turned these switches on, we'll go ahead and hit Save, and we'll switch into the Web Connector again. Now we're going to click the Update Selected button once more. And now because these switches are on, this will take a little bit longer to process as it runs through pulling this type of data into our sync. One important note here is that this isn't actually syncing anything with your WooCommerce store. All it's doing is loading up our sync with these specific lists of data from QuickBooks in order to proceed with the next step of settings and mappings. So we'll wait for these progress bars to hit 100% and for the green text here to say complete, and we'll switch back into your admin. Now at this point, we can turn all of these switches back off. And the reason we're turning them back off is so that every time you run the Web Connector, it doesn't refresh these lists over and over again. That's simply not necessary. Now that we've saved, we're finished refreshing data. At this point, there's a few helpful tips to know. Firstly, is we can go to the Dashboard menu here under MyWorks Sync. And if we scroll down on this page, we'll see a few metrics at the bottom. Over here on the right, it tells us what type of data is in WooCommerce. We can see we have a few customers, products, variations, and active payment gateways. Here on the left, it now tells us that we have an active QuickBooks connection. It's pulled in a few customers into our sync. It's refreshed our sync with the latest lists of your QuickBooks products, and it's pulled in some other type of data like your QuickBooks accounts. Again, this is just pulling it into our sync, not syncing anything with WooCommerce yet. Now that we've verified it's pulled in everything from QuickBooks into our sync, we can also check our log here on the left. This log is always a running activity log for any type of sync activity with QuickBooks. In this case, we can scroll down and see that it's pulled in things like 36 accounts, 32 products, a few payment methods, etc. In this log, any errors will show up in red. For example, this error. This is something that we can simply ignore because this is just telling us that this version of QuickBooks doesn't have something called inventory sites. In the future, if you ever have any errors with QuickBooks when you're syncing, the log is the first place to go to see what that actual error is, like this. Now that we've confirmed in your log and checked your dashboard to make sure that it's correctly scanned QuickBooks for your latest list of customers, products, accounts, and more, we can move on to the next step of mapping. It's worth noting here that you can follow along in our documentation in the Getting Started section. So for example, we can go to the Installation and QuickBooks connection, and we'll walk through the steps we just did of installing the plugin in your WordPress admin, adding the application in QuickBooks, and finalizing the connection with the Web Connector. The next steps will be refreshing data, configuring your mappings, and configuring your settings. This can be followed along in the doc called Initial Setup and Configuration, where here on the right, we walk you through those 3 steps of refreshing your data, configuring your settings, and mapping your existing data. We'll go through this doc now on the video, but you can always follow along or just read the step-by-step directions here in this doc as well. Now that we've refreshed your data, the next step is to configure your mappings. We're going to go to the Map menu here on the left in order to do that. This is your Map dashboard. You can see the different types of data here on the top that walk you through the different types of data that you can map. We're going to start on the Customer menu. Clicking on Customer, we'll see a list of your active WooCommerce customers here on the left and a list of your QuickBooks customers here in the drop-down on the right. This has populated a live list of your customers in QuickBooks. It's worth noting here that if you don't see all of your WooCommerce customers on this page, that may be because you're using custom roles in WooCommerce. Custom roles would show up if you go to the Users menu, and you would see additional roles here on the top other than Administrator or Customer. If this is the case, it's very easy to set our sync to recognize those roles. We'd go into our settings, which we'll review here a little bit later, and we'll go to the Mapping menu on the top. Here on the top where it says Recognize Additional Roles as Customers, we would go ahead and choose those roles like Administrator, Subscriber, etc. And a list of all of your custom roles would show up here to select. Once you do so, you can scroll down and hit Save. Back to the Mapping menu, we'll go to your Customers again. Here again, you can see a list of your customers, and on the right, you can see a list of your QuickBooks customers as well. Now, the only requirement for setup as far as mapping customers goes is that if you have a customer that exists both in WooCommerce and in QuickBooks, it must be mapped together. This is very easy to do in several different ways. First, you can manually choose a mapping. So say Jason Smith exists in QuickBooks. We can click on the drop-down and search for Jason. We found him in QuickBooks, and we'll manually select a match. Now, just like that, after we save, he's going to be matched together. This means that any orders that Jason places on the website, when we sync those orders into QuickBooks, they will go into this customer in QuickBooks. So as you can see, it's very easy to manually change those mappings. If I'd like it to instead go into the admin user, I can go ahead and set that mapping very easily here. Another way, especially when you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of customers, to map your customers is using the Auto Map feature. This button here in the top is a one-time tool that will have our sync scan your list of existing WooCommerce and QuickBooks customers and automatically map here together anyone with existing data. For example, like a matching email address or a matching name or even a matching company name. Let's try running an auto map by email and see what happens. One note is this checkbox to only apply to unmapped customers you can check only if you have existing mappings that you don't want to disrupt. Say we've saved this admin user and we don't want to disrupt that mapping, we would go ahead and check this box. But for right now, we'll leave this unchecked, which means it'll check all of your WooCommerce customers to see if there's a match by email address. So we'll click Auto Map here. We'll see this loading text there in the top left said that there were 2 customers matched. Scrolling down, we can see it found Ashley and John in QuickBooks because they had matching email addresses there. Normally, this requirement is enough to match your existing customers. Obviously, if you have a new QuickBooks company or a staging or new WooCommerce site, you won't have any WooCommerce customers to map, and that's perfectly fine. Any new WooCommerce customers that register and or place an order in the future, once our sync is set up, would be automatically synced into QuickBooks for you and matched here on this page. So again, just to review, the only requirement we have here is that if your customer exists already, both in WooCommerce and in QuickBooks, they should be matched together here on this page. All future customers will automatically sync and map for you. Just to run that auto map example one more time, say we've already matched by email, but we'd also like to try matching by last name. So I can choose last name here. If I choose only apply to unmapped customers, this will preserve the mappings for Ashley and John and just check the rest of the unmapped customers to see if there's a match. We'll go ahead and click Auto Map here. And in this case, it didn't find any matches. So running that auto map by email again, it's preserved Ashley and John. It's now remapped Ashley and John. Now that we've reviewed our customer mappings, we'll go ahead and move on to the product mappings. Very similar to your customer mappings, the only requirement we have during setup for your product mappings is simply that if a product exists both in WooCommerce and in QuickBooks, that it should be mapped together. Very much like the customer mappings, you can see your WooCommerce product here on the left, and you're going to see a drop-down of your QuickBooks products here on the right. It's very easy to also, again, manually match them together. So for example, the coffee mug here, we can map to the coffee mug in QuickBooks and simply hit save. If we'd like to automatically match them, we can also do so. You'll notice this SKU column here shows that the coffee mug and the MyWorks t-shirt product do not have a SKU. We always recommend that you do have a SKU in your WooCommerce and QuickBooks products, as this will allow you to easily auto map them together, which we'll go through in a moment. If you don't use a SKU, you can also auto map by your WooCommerce product name. So for example, we can say we'd like to auto map our products by name, matching the QuickBooks item name or number. We'll click auto map, and we can see it's picked up two for us, the coffee mug and the MyWorks t-shirt. This auto mapping would work the same way if you have SKUs in place. So you would choose your WooCommerce field as SKU, matching to your QuickBooks item name or number. As long as those two fields match, then we would fill in the selected product here on the right with the auto map. You'll also notice the type column here. This is telling us the type of the product in WooCommerce. As we can see on the top, the blue t-shirt is a variable product, and the rest of the two products are a simple product. You'd always be able to map variable products here on this page, but we don't require you to map your variable parent products. So your simple products can be mapped on this page, but variable products will show up on this page. However, you don't need to map them here. You're perfectly fine leaving this blank. That's because in the Variations tab here on the left, we'll be able to individually map any of the variations. One note as well is the QuickBooks class column here on the right. You can leave this blank by default, but if you use classes in QuickBooks and you'd like to assign some classes to specific products, you can also do this here. Otherwise, it's perfectly fine to leave this blank. Now that we've auto-mapped our products, our simple products here by name or by SKU, let's go ahead and save, and we'll move on to the Variations menu. Clicking Variations here in the top left, we can see a list of all of our variations in WooCommerce on the left. So you can see we have a red small, red medium, red large t-shirt. These are all the variations for that blue t-shirt product. As you can see here, only one of them has a SKU. But in real life, we recommend that you assign a SKU to as many variations and simple products as you can. That way, if that SKU matches the item name number in QuickBooks, it's very easy for you to automatically match them together. So here we'll try auto mapping by name. We'll go ahead and choose the WooCommerce field of name and the QuickBooks field of item name number. We'll click auto map, and it matched up one for us, the blue t-shirt, red small. Again, the same process would be if you used a SKU. If this product had a SKU, you'd be able to auto map by SKU. So you'd choose SKU here in the WooCommerce field and item name number for the QuickBooks field. Now that this is auto mapped, we're all set to move on from our product mappings. So just to review, the only requirements we have for mapping your products during setup is that if your products exist both in WooCommerce and in QuickBooks, they should be mapped together here on this page. If you have products that only exist in WooCommerce, you can push them to QuickBooks through our sync using the push menu here on the left. And we'll get to that here in just a moment. If you have products that exist only in QuickBooks, you can export them from QuickBooks via a CSV file and easily import that CSV file into WooCommerce using the built-in WooCommerce importer here on the All Products tab. We do not automatically sync products backwards from QuickBooks into WooCommerce. Only inventory levels and pricing, which we'll cover here in the next step. So by mapping your products, you're helping our sync do two things. First, if you're managing inventory in both WooCommerce and QuickBooks, mapping a product will ensure that we can sync inventory levels between it. Secondly, that ensures that when the coffee mug is ordered in WooCommerce, when we sync that order into QuickBooks, we'll be able to correctly add that line item of coffee mug for that order in QuickBooks. Moving on from the product mappings, we're going to move to the payment method mappings. This page here will show one section for each of the active WooCommerce gateways you have activated on your store. We're compatible with any WooCommerce gateway. It just needs to be activated in your WooCommerce settings. So scrolling down here on this page, it looks like on this demo store, we have Pay Later, PayPal, credit card turned on in WooCommerce. So that's why they're showing as sections here on this page. What this page allows us to control is if an order is placed by PayPal, for example, in WooCommerce, if we've turned on the payment syncing button, this allows us to sync a payment along with that order into QuickBooks for you. So we'll sync the order and a payment into QuickBooks if this switch is on. So once we turn the switch on, it's going to ask us to set two things, a QuickBooks Desktop payment method and a QuickBooks Desktop bank account. The QuickBooks Desktop payment method is simply a label. This pulls in a list of your payment methods in QuickBooks, so we'll choose the most applicable one. At this point, you could jump into QuickBooks to create a payment method called PayPal, or if that's already there, you can go ahead and just choose that here. So, again, this is just a label, so whichever you choose, it's not going to affect anything in QuickBooks. This just chooses how this label displays when we sync the payment into QuickBooks. The important setting is going to be the QuickBooks Desktop bank account. This is going to show a list of your chart of accounts in QuickBooks, and this will allow you to choose which account you'd like us to deposit that payment into in QuickBooks. The best way to decide which account this would be is to ask yourself how you would set up this payment if you manually entered it into QuickBooks. It's very common for you to choose undeposited funds here, or to search for bank, and it'll show a list of your bank accounts to choose your bank. In this case, we're going to choose undeposited funds. If you're not sure about this setting, it's best to check with your accountant and ask them which bank account in QuickBooks you would like payments to be deposited into when we sync them into QuickBooks. All the rest of these settings are optional. Terms mapping is optional. You can set it to be either due on receipt, for example, or net 30. It's up to you, or you can leave it blank. Moving on to credit card, we can set it up the same way. We'll turn the switch on, select a payment method here, maybe we'll call it Visa, and select a bank account for it to deposit those payments into too. This time we'll choose checking and go ahead and hit save. Now that your payment mappings are set up, which again in review allows us to know when we're syncing an order into QuickBooks, if we're syncing a payment as well, and what bank account in QuickBooks we're syncing that payment into. This doesn't affect how payments take place in real life because that would be configured by your processor like PayPal or Stripe to tell them what bank account in real life you'd like them to deposit their payments into. Now we'll move on to the last important mapping called your tax rate mappings. If you're not charging any taxes in WooCommerce or in QuickBooks, you can skip this step because you'll just see a blank page here. However, if you have taxes set up in your WooCommerce settings, you'll see those tax rates reflected here. In this case, we have an 8% rate set up for Florida. Clicking this drop down here on the right will show us a list of all of the sales tax items set up in QuickBooks. So we choose the applicable 8% rate, which in this case is Florida state tax, and go ahead and hit save. You would want to make sure you do this for any and all WooCommerce tax rates you have set up here. If you're using an automated tax rate service like WooCommerce Tax Calculations or a service like Avalara, TaxJar, or Taxify, you'd be also able to set up, we have compatibility with that, and you'd be able to set that up in our settings in the next step. So you wouldn't have to set anything here. The coupon code and shipping method menus here in the top right are optional. You don't need to set these by default, and they would only need to be set if you'd like to individually map different shipping methods or coupons to a specific product in QuickBooks. So say instead of just having a coupon or discount product, you had a shipping product in QuickBooks, you had a product called UPS shipping or USPS shipping or FedEx shipping, and you wanted to match those individually. That's when you'd be able to use the shipping method or the coupon code mapping. But by default, most of our users will leave these blank. Now that we've configured your mappings, we are almost finished with setup. The last step is to jump into your settings menu over here to finish setting a few more default settings. Because we were just talking about the shipping and coupon mappings, we're going to start addressing those first. Here in the bottom, you can see the last two options is to set a default QuickBooks shipping product and a default QuickBooks coupon code product. This would be set to, this tells us when we're syncing an order into QuickBooks that contains a shipping charge or a coupon or discount. This tells us what line item in QuickBooks, what product to use to assign that charge to. So normally you choose a shipping product here. We don't have it in our test QuickBooks store, so we'll go just set it to a test product, for example. For your coupon code product, you would be able to select a discount or coupon code product that you already use in QuickBooks. Typically, this is called discount or coupon. Now we'll jump back to the top of this page, and we'll set this very first setting called default for unmatched products. What this setting represents is it's only going to be used when we sync an order into QuickBooks that contains a product that's not mapped. So if you recall in our product mappings earlier, we mapped all of our simple products and only some of our variations. So say one of those unmapped variations is ordered in WooCommerce. If this setting is set, we'll still sync that order into QuickBooks, but instead of seeing the variation there in the product line item, because it doesn't exist in QuickBooks, we would see whatever product we set here, for example, test. We always recommend setting this to a very generic sales or miscellaneous product if you have it in QuickBooks. If you don't, now would be a good time to create that, or you can choose to leave this setting blank. If you decide to leave this setting blank, that means that any order that in WooCommerce that's placed that includes a product that is not mapped to a QuickBooks product through our sync would simply error out and tell you that there's no product found in QuickBooks, that you either need to set that product mapping in your mapping tab or come here and set a default. Usually we recommend setting this to some type of miscellaneous or generic product to reduce the possibility of errors. However, if 100% of your QuickBooks products or 100% of your WooCommerce products are mapped to your QuickBooks products, this setting would never be used, so you could also ignore it. Now there's the last three settings on this page. A default, and you can see they all end in for new products. What these settings are used for is if you choose to have our sync in new WooCommerce products into QuickBooks as they're created. Just like when you create a product in QuickBooks, it asks you to assign a sales account, an inventory asset account, and a cost of goods sold account. That's what we're doing here. We're presetting those accounts if our sync is going to sync products from WooCommerce into QuickBooks. Let's assume we'll turn that setting on here in the next step. So we're going to go ahead and set these. Normally this is set to this must be an income account in QuickBooks, so we'll choose sales income here. The default inventory asset account needs to be an inventory asset account in QuickBooks. We'll choose inventory asset here. Normally both inventory asset and cost of goods are already going to be present in your QuickBooks company. And we'll choose cost of goods sold here as well. Now that these are all set, we can go ahead and hit save on the left. Now that this is saved, there's a few other essential settings to set, and we'll be all finished with setup. We're going to go to the order menu next. You can see we break out our settings into a few different tabs, but most of these are optional and are already configured by default, which means you don't need to change them unless you'd like to change the way that our sync works. We're going to focus on the very first setting here called Sync WooCommerce Orders As. This is telling our sync how to sync WooCommerce orders into QuickBooks. By default, it's going to be set to invoice, which means we'll sync an invoice into QuickBooks, and if they paid an actual payment via credit card or PayPal, for example, in WooCommerce, we'll also sync a payment along with that invoice. So here we can choose whether to sync orders keep order syncing as an invoice, or choose it to something else like sales receipt or sales order, if that's how you like orders to sync into QuickBooks. We also have more advanced options here on the right if you'd like to limit or change the way we sync orders on a per role basis or per gateway. For example, you could have wholesale users or roles in WooCommerce that you'd like orders coming in as a sales order and everyone else coming in as an invoice, for example. Or you may want orders syncing in a different way based on a gateway. And if you choose this, you'll be able to choose how those order sync types are set back in map and payment method. For now, we'll keep it to invoice and move on to the next tab. The next necessary tab is going to be your taxes menu. Here, these first two tabs will usually be blank, and we'll simply select tax for the first one and non for the second one. This just tells us which tax codes in QuickBooks are taxable and which tax code is non-taxable. Here is as well is where if you're using an automatic tax calculation service in WooCommerce, you would turn on the setting to sync WooCommerce order tax as a line item. This is where you would turn that on here, and you would select a sales tax item in QuickBooks or a regular product in QuickBooks that's tied to a sales tax liability account to tell us how to sync WooCommerce order tax in as a line item into QuickBooks. We have additional documentation and articles on this as well if you'd like more information. Now that we've set our taxes menu, we're going to go ahead and move on to the last essential menu called Automatic Sync. You'll see there's two sections on this page. The top section is WooCommerce to QuickBooks, and the bottom section is the opposite direction, QuickBooks to WooCommerce. This controls how our sync will automatically sync new data for you. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we will only automatically sync new data, like new orders, new customers, and new products into QuickBooks. We'll never automatically sync old data, like old customers or old orders into QuickBooks, unless you tell us to by pushing it manually into QuickBooks via the push menu. This means it's very easy for you to control what type of data is making its way into QuickBooks, because we'll only sync new data, and you can control that by these switches. For example, if we turned all of these switches off, that means that we would not automatically sync any type of new data, whether it's a customer, order, product, etc. So by default, you'll see that these switches, the customer, order, and payment switches, are turned on. And normally it's fine to leave those turned on if you'd like us to automatically sync your new customers, orders, and payments. If you'd also like us to sync additional data types like products, you can turn those on here. So if I turn on the product and variation tabs, that means that when I create a new product or variation in WooCommerce, that will be automatically synced into QuickBooks. Also, in the bottom section, you can choose which type of data to sync backwards from QuickBooks into WooCommerce. It's very popular for our users to turn on the inventory sync. This means that if this switch is turned on, every time the Web Connector runs, we'll automatically sync inventory levels backwards from QuickBooks up to WooCommerce. You can also turn on pricing here if you wish as well. Now that we've turned these on, let's go ahead and hit save. And again, you can choose these to be set however you'd like data to be automatically synced. There's no requirement here, whatever works best to fit your needs. Now that these settings are set, we've finished setting the required essential settings in order to proceed with syncing. So let's run through a few basics of how syncing works, and then we'll try syncing a few test customers, orders, and/or products to give you a feel of how syncing will work going forward. Let's go ahead and visit the WooCommerce Orders tab. If we go over here to WooCommerce Orders, we'll see a list of all of your orders in WooCommerce. And you'll notice we add a column over here on the right that tells you the status of this order, if it's been synced to QuickBooks or not. It's very normal once you've set up your sync and visit this page for all of your orders to show not synced, because obviously you just set our sync up. As a reminder, we'll always automatically sync any new orders for you. Now let's walk through some basics of how our sync works going forward. You may have noticed the queue menu here on the left under MyWorks Sync. This queue will normally stay at 0 during setup after you finish refreshing your data. You may see a few orders be added to the queue if people are placing orders while you're finishing setup. So at this point, this would be a good time to visit the queue. If there's anything in the queue, there's a button at the bottom to clear that queue out down to 0. So you'll have a fresh start. So just to summarize, any new orders will be automatically added to this queue. And as a reminder, you'll be able to control what new data is automatically added to the queue by the automatic sync menu in our settings. So if we go to settings, then automatic sync, whichever switches are on, that means that any new data for those switches will be automatically added to the queue. So because we have customer, order, and product turned on, any new customers, orders, or products added in WooCommerce will be automatically added to this queue for you. Going back to the orders page, we see here on the right all of your orders are not synced. So let's take this most recent order and try syncing it into QuickBooks. Well, what we can do is we can always manually push an order into QuickBooks with a few different ways. First, we can use the bulk actions menu and say we wanted just to push these 3 orders into QuickBooks. We would click bulk actions and click add to queue. Or we can manually just add 1 or 2 orders to the queue if we'd like to test them, for example, by clicking the add to queue button over here on the right. We'll click add to queue. You can see a progress window opened up, adding this order to the queue, and we'll click close. Now if we visit the queue, we can see that there's one order in the queue. There may be a few different activities like adding a customer or an invoice along with it, but we can see that this order has been added to the queue. Now if we go back and visit WooCommerce Orders, we can see the status here has changed to queue. This would be the default for any new orders as well, since they'll be automatically added to the queue as soon as they're placed. One note here that determines how we add orders to the queue is by the status. By default, we'll add any orders that hit processing or completed to the queue. So if an order is placed and is on hold, normally that won't be automatically added to the queue until it changes to processing or completed. You can change which statuses we use as triggers in our settings, in our order settings. Now that this order is queued, all that has to be done is running the Web Connector. So the second step of syncing orders on a day-to-day basis, now that they've been added to the queue, is simply running the Web Connector. So we'll go ahead and visit the Web Connector here in your dock. If it's been closed, it's very easy to reopen it. You would simply go in QuickBooks to File, and then Update Web Services. That will always reopen the Web Connector for you. Now that we've opened the Web Connector, now the next time that we run it, it's going to check the queue. Any new orders that are in the queue would be automatically synced into QuickBooks for you. So let's go ahead and run it now to sync this customer and order into QuickBooks. We're going to click on the Web Connector, scroll down to our application. You normally will only have one application here. And again, we'll click the Update Selected button. We'll see these progress bars start to run through, and we'll wait for them to finish. Now, one quick note here is that you don't have to click Update Selected every time you'd like to run a sync. That's what this Auto Run button is for. Say, for example, you'd like the Web Connector to automatically check in with the site every 30 minutes. That we can turn the checkbox on, we'll set it to 30, and click Enter. This means that now every 30 minutes, the Web Connector will automatically check in with the site. If there's any orders, customers, products, or inventory in the queue, it'll automatically sync that into QuickBooks. This makes it very easy to automatically have the sync running without your manual interference. All that's required is that the Web Connector simply be open. So you just want to leave it open. You can even minimize it if you'd like to as well. For right now, we'll turn it off while we're testing. Now that the Web Connector is finished running, we should be able to see that order is synced to QuickBooks. We'll go to the WooCommerce Orders tab here. And if we reload the page, we'll see that the status here has turned to synced. Now that it's turned green and turned to synced, we know that that's been synced to QuickBooks. There's a few other ways we can verify this as well. If we go back to MyWorks Sync here on the left, we see that the queue is empty. But we can also go to the Log menu here on the left to see the latest sync activity. Here in the top 3 statuses, we can see that the Web Connector connected to the site. It synced that customer into QuickBooks. It synced the order into QuickBooks as well. And because that order affected stock in QuickBooks, it updated inventory for us as well for that coffee mug that was ordered. And this inventory was updated only because we had the inventory switch turned on in our settings. So by going to automatic sync, this inventory switch was what controlled that. If we turn this off, it will not automatically sync inventory from QuickBooks up to the site. Additionally, we can go into QuickBooks now to verify that the order was synced in. We'll go ahead and jump into QuickBooks. If we go to your customer list, we see Celine Marie here as a new customer, and we can see this invoice under her customer as well. We can double click that invoice to view it and see all of the details. There's a few simple notes to note about how we sync orders into QuickBooks by default. By default, you'll always see the item code as the mapped product in QuickBooks. So because we mapped coffee mug, that showed up here correctly as a product. Because we set test for our shipping line item, that's what came in for shipping. Normally you'd set this to shipping in our settings. You can see we synced in the full billing and shipping address here from the WooCommerce order. We also synced the date of the WooCommerce order and the invoice number. By default, this number, whether it's an invoice or sales receipt or sales order, will always match your WooCommerce order number. If we go back to WooCommerce, we can see this was order number 106. We have a setting if you'd prefer to use the next available QuickBooks invoice or sales order or sales receipt number instead of the WooCommerce order number. You can turn that on in our settings and in the order tab. So you'd visit our site, your site, go to MyWorks Sync and then Settings, and there's a setting in the Order menu to use the next QuickBooks sequence number. But by default, the order number in WooCommerce will always match the record number in QuickBooks. Now that this is in QuickBooks, we can go ahead and go back to your WooCommerce site. Again, we've noticed that this says synced on the right, which tells us that the order has been synced to QuickBooks. The reason that the order was only synced, that only the invoice was synced to QuickBooks instead of an invoice and a payment, was because we can see this order is paid by pay later or terms. And that was a gateway in our settings that we did not enable mapping for. So we only synced an open invoice into QuickBooks. This is generally helpful because then you can run your AR and send your client an invoice out of QuickBooks itself, then record a payment in QuickBooks whenever you receive their physical payment. Now let's try syncing an order that has an actual payment, in this case credit card or Stripe. We'll click Add to Queue again. We'll notice here in the settings that in the log that it's added both the order and the payment into the queue. Now that this is complete, we can close out the progress bar and go to MyWorks Sync and Queue to see if it's in the queue. Sure enough, it's going to add the customer, order, and payment into the queue for us. Again, we'll go back to WooCommerce Orders. We can see this order is now queued, and all we have to do is run the Web Connector, or at this point wait for it to automatically run, and it would sync that order into QuickBooks for us. Now we'll go ahead and click Update Selected again. We'll wait for it to finish running. And we can go ahead and refresh our orders page and see that it's now also turned to synced. Jumping into QuickBooks, we'll go back to our Customer Center, and this time we'll search for Rena. We can see she's here. And if we look at her customer record, we see that there's two records now, an invoice and a payment. Again, that invoice number is going to match what was the order number in WooCommerce, which is 92. And we'll see that there's a payment as well that's deposited to the checking account, which is what we chose earlier in our payment mappings. You can see that if there's a transaction ID recorded in WooCommerce, we'll also sync that in as a reference number here as well. Jumping into the invoice, we can again see a coffee mug was ordered, this time 3 of them in WooCommerce. And you can see we synced in the rest of the info just like the other order. At this point, we've finished testing our orders. You can do the same thing in your site or just wait for new WooCommerce orders to come in. They'll be automatically added to the queue, and you can sync them into QuickBooks just like we did for these. Now let's try pushing some products from WooCommerce to QuickBooks. We'll go to MyWorks Sync here on the left and go to the Push menu down here below. This Push dashboard allows you to control syncing any existing data in WooCommerce, manually pushing it into QuickBooks. As we mentioned earlier, we'll only automatically sync new data from WooCommerce to QuickBooks. So this is a great opportunity if you have existing products in WooCommerce that are not yet in QuickBooks, or you simply need to catch up on syncing things like old orders into QuickBooks. Say, for example, you haven't synced orders for the last month, or you haven't created orders in QuickBooks for the last month. You can very easily push those orders into the queue here as well. So this is another way to be able to push orders into the queue. This is easier to do in bulk. You can just check the box here on the left and click Push Selected Orders for any orders that are not synced already. But now we're going to go ahead and test syncing some products. So we're going to go to the Product menu. We can see here the coffee mug and the MyWorks t-shirt have green check boxes over here because we've already mapped them to a QuickBooks product. This is telling us they already exist in QuickBooks. So let's try pushing some variations. We'll go to the Variations menu here on the top. Here we can see a list of all of our variations. We notice that this top one has a green checkbox as well because we've already mapped that to a QuickBooks product. Let's go ahead and try pushing these 2 products into QuickBooks. We'll go ahead and select them, hit Push Selected Variations, and if we visit our queue now, we'll see these products are in the queue. The reason they're in the queue as non-inventory items is because if we go back a tab, we'll see that the Manage Stock for these variations is turned off. So Manage Stock is set to No. This setting in WooCommerce determines how we sync products into QuickBooks. If you're managing stock for a product or variation in WooCommerce, we'll sync it into QuickBooks as an inventory item. Otherwise, if you're not, like in this case, we'll sync it into QuickBooks as a non-inventory item. Now that we've added these products to the queue, you guessed it, we're going to go back to the Web Connector and click Update Selected again. We'll wait for it to finish running. And if we simply reload this variation push page, we can see that these now have check marks next to them, telling us that they've been synced to QuickBooks. If we go into QuickBooks, we can go into our item list. And here again, we'll see that we have our 2 additional variations here as well. One note here is that this push page is very helpful to push products from WooCommerce into QuickBooks if they're not already in QuickBooks. As a reminder, if your products are already in both QuickBooks and WooCommerce, you would want to map them here together on our mapping page on the left. One note as well is if you have products that exist only in QuickBooks and not in WooCommerce, you would want to export them from QuickBooks via CSV file and import them into WooCommerce via the built-in product importer in WooCommerce. We don't currently support syncing products from QuickBooks back into WooCommerce for this reason. It's already very simple to export them from QuickBooks and import them into WooCommerce. This wraps up our testing of syncing products. At this point, you should be all set to go to start syncing any new orders, products, customers, etc. As a reminder, any new orders will be automatically added to the queue, along with the data types of any other data that you turned on in our automatic sync settings. If you've set your Web Connector to automatically run, all you'll have to do is leave that open, and that will automatically check in with the queue every 30 minutes in this example, and sync any orders from the queue into QuickBooks for you. Now that your setup is complete and orders are syncing, you're all set to go. We recommend you review our documentation to answer any other questions you may have or learn about other features in our sync. And as a reminder, you can always open up a ticket with our 24/7 support team in your account with any follow-up questions as well. You would simply visit the support menu and you can open up a ticket in your account with us. Thanks for watching and happy syncing.